Hi, this is Daniela with Community Library. Welcome to our first virtual sewing class. Today I'm going to show you how to make these face masks with fabric ties, which is a great alternative if you don't like masks with elastic around the ears. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. To start with, you're going to need two 8 by 8.5 inch pieces of fabric for the front of your face mask, and you're going to need two 1.5 by 34 inch strips, and these are going to be your fabric ties. And you can choose to do the same fabric for both of these. I have another example where I've done that same thing. Or if you want to, you can also use coordinating fabric for your ties, like I've done with these. Another thing you can decide to do is you can use one fabric for the front of your mask and a different fabric for the back, and then you have a reversible mask. Now we're going to start putting everything together. So take your two pieces of 8 by 8.5 inch fabric and match them up right sides together, making sure those edges are nice and even. And we're going to sew around the perimeter using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, with the exception of about 2 or 3 inches that we're going to leave open so that we can flip our fabric back inside out. So I'm going to start about halfway down, maybe a little more than halfway, and I'm going to take a few stitches here to start, and then I'm going to take a few back stitches just to secure my thread. And now I'm going to start stitching, but I'm not going to go all the way to the edge of the fabric. I want to stop a 1/4 inch shy of that, and you'll see why in a moment here. So as I get to the edge, I've got about a 1/4 inch left. I'm going to stop, and I'm going to leave my needle in the down position, lift the presser foot, and then pivot the fabric. So now I can sew all the way down here, and we're going to do that all the way around. So again, I'm going to stop about a 1/4 inch shy of that edge, leave my needle down, lift my presser foot, pivot, and sew again. And just make sure you keep those edges together. If you need to, go ahead and pin your fabrics together. I didn't with this one because it's not a huge square, but if you feel more comfortable doing that, then by all means. So here we go. We're going to stop again at a 1/4 inch and turn. And we have one more corner here. And again, remember, I'm leaving some of this open, so I'm not going to sew all the way to where I began. I'm going to go in a little bit, stop. I'm going to take my few back stitches here, and that's where I'm going to end. So now, what I can do is flip this whole thing right side out. So you can see I've got a hole there, so I can actually just turn the whole thing. And then what I would recommend is to get really nice, neat corners, to use something that's not too sharp, because if you use a pair of scissors for this, you might tear your fabric. I like to use a dull pencil and just poke it in here into the corners, because then you'll be able to get that corner to stick out all the way, and it'll be a nice square corner for you. Okay. And now what we're going to do is press all of this down nice and flat, and keep in mind you've got a little bit of seam allowance here where you want to make sure that those press down nice and neat, and we're actually going to be stitching around this. So after I press it, this is what it's going to look like. And then I just need to find my opening here and make sure when I stitch through that opening that it's going to be nice and flat. So our next step is to take our square after we've pressed it, and we are going to now top stitch all the way around. And top stitch just means we're going to sew really close to the edge here, and what that does is it keeps these pieces from shifting. It kind of sets them together. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started. And again, I'm going to do just a couple of back stitch just to make sure that's secure. And then I'm just following along the line of the fabric, getting as close to that edge as I can. Again, I want to make sure my needle is in the down position, because now lift your presser foot, pivot your fabric, and continue. Same concept as we just did a minute ago. And so for this, you're not following a 1/4 inch seam allowance because you're just getting as close to the edge as you can. If you go too far, it's okay. Do a back stitch and you'll get to that edge again. And then turn. We're almost there. We've got another corner here to turn. So and I'm on my last corner, and this is the part that was open, so I just want to make sure that this is nice and flat when I stitch it down. And try to end as closely as you can to where you started, so you're on that same stitch line. And again, we will do just 1 or 2 back stitches. There we go. And that's it. So I'm going to cut my threads here, and now we are ready to move on to the next step. Okay, now our next step is going to be to work on our strips, our fabric ties. I'm going to take one of the strips and fold it in half lengthwise, wrong sides together, and then just press that down. And then you're going to open it up and bring these 2 edges in together, and then fold that in half and press again. And what this does is it gives you a nice clean edge, so none of those raw edges are showing through. And then you don't have threads all over the place. So I have one here where I've already done that. And if it's easier for you, again, go ahead and pin this. I'm just going to kind of keep an eye on it and make sure the fold stays as I run it through the machine. So we're just going to start here, and this is going to be like when we did the top stitch a few minutes ago. We're going to stay very close to our edge here and not worry about a 1/4 inch seam allowance. The most important thing is to make sure that all of your edges are sewn together so that you don't have any gaps. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. If you do end up with a gap somewhere and you missed part of it, I would take that portion apart and restart, because what's going to happen is when you wash this in the machine, that's going to unravel and start to come apart. And then you will have your raw edges showing. So we're just running this all the way through. I'm going to make my adjustment here to make sure everything's folded properly. Now when we get to the end, what we want to do is trim off our threads, and then we are going to secure both of the ends because here we've got our raw edge again. So we want to fold this in and then fold it in again one more time. And so now you have a nice clean seam there. So then I'm just going to run that through again. Oops. And then you can do the same thing on the other end. Fold it together and then just run it through the machine again. I've got one here that's already finished. So this one has been completed. I've got my nice edges here that aren't going to come apart in the wash. They shouldn't unravel on me. Now that we've completed the front of our face mask and our ties, we can go ahead and put the whole thing together. So what I'm going to do is, starting with the face mask, I want to use the 8.5-inch side, the long one, and I'm going to pleat my fabric. So basically I'm just going to take a piece and fold it upwards and then pin it in place. And here you really do want to pin because it's not going to stay together if you don't. So and now I'm going to do one more pleat. And pin it. And I'm going to fold up one final pleat. So I'm just going to start here and fold up. And it doesn't have to be exact, because what happens when you put this on is it opens up anyway, so it's going to be just fine. If you'd like to measure and make sure that you get the pleats exactly in the center, then that's fine. So I have it pinned. Now I'm going to take one of my straps and I want to fold it in half so I know where halfway point is. And I want to put my halfway point halfway along this side. And I'm going to put my tie underneath my fabric and butt it up against to this edge. And then what I'm going to do is do a little bit more pinning here. And now what I'm going to do is sew this together. So we're just doing one stitch. You don't have to do one stitch to secure the pleats and then another stitch to put on the tie. We're just going to pin it securely so that we can just do one stitch all together. And again, this is going to be like the top stitch where I'm staying pretty close to the edge, not quite a 1/4 inch. And I want to start with a stitch or two and back stitch 1 or 2. And make sure that your needle is always in the down position. So when you start and stop, nothing's shifting around. Now I'm just going to start sewing. Take out my pins. Don't sew over your pins. Never do that. It could ruin your machine. It'll bend your pins, possibly break your needle, and it's not good for your machine. So always take your pins out and don't sew over them. And now when I get to the edge, again, I'm going to just go 1 or 2 over and do my little back stitch here, and I'm nice and secure. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the other strap. And the last step is to put on your new mask. Thanks for joining us for the first Community Library virtual sewing class, and we hope that you'll join us for more classes soon.